Okay, on the budget now, Laura, and the last minute shift was the $5 billion that was going to go to a company tax cut and ended up in the pockets of families. That was the big one.
It was. I think there were signals that we were certainly reporting about a month ago that they were going to dump the company tax cuts because they couldn't get them through the Senate. And I think it was a fairly late decision that it was going to go into the pockets of families. I think the interesting thing about all of that is that you've got Tony Abbott sort of, they were thinking so politically, they were just trying to think of anything they could do to wedge Tony Abbott on both company tax, the mining tax and all of these payments, and that was the final bit that brought the budget together in a way.
Wayne Swan and Peter Anderson, representing business here, had this to say about it.
The Liberal Party were against it in the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Greens from day one said they were never going to support it, and I certainly wasn't going to sit round twiddling my thumbs when it was going to go down in the Parliament.
That is a dreadful breach of promise, and one which is going to sit very badly with hundreds of thousands of business people who are running businesses, working hard, and are not getting the tax relief they were promised.
Now, it seems the government's attitude behind the scenes was that the business community didn't go in hard enough against the coalition. They didn't push them hard enough for the company tax cut. And in fact, a lot of them, both in the business community, ridiculed the size of it and said it's minuscule. So they said, OK, we'll give the money to someone who does care.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the business community was pretty scathing. Once the original, you remember the original company tax cut was going to be much bigger. When it was cut back to 1 percentage point, or about 3%, most of the business community said, well, this is a joke anyway. So I suppose there's sort of an interesting thing going on where you've got, on one hand, the government trying to restore its relationship with the business community, and Julia Gillard's been making a lot of efforts to do that. And also, if you remember, in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of speculation about them actually putting a lot of extra imposts on the business community, and particularly the miners, which turned out to be not true. So you've got the business community sort of angry about the company tax cut, but forgetting that they didn't get the extra imposts. And at the same time, I think the government sort of saying, well, we haven't got anything to lose with the business community. They don't like us. They're not going to. There's not all that many of them to vote for us. We don't have all that much to lose in terms of giving up this company tax cut, particularly since the opposition isn't going to support us in getting it through.
But it was also, I think, the mixed messages that were going out before that, because remember in March, Gillard and Swan and Wong were out there arguing very strongly for the company tax cut, saying how important it was for economic growth, yes, for jobs, and
especially for small business.
And especially for small business. And then all of a sudden,
and then Bob Brown came out and said, "We're not going to support them,
except for small business."
That's
so
right.
that that would have been something.
They're arguing that you'd end up with this differential in the company tax rate. Now, you can debate that a bit more, but I think they probably decided, well, we might as well just throw out the baby with the bathwater on this one.
Yeah.
And was there sort of an element of sort of a fit of pique about this?
Well, I don't know if it's a fit of pique. I think they made a cold, hard political decision that the business community wasn't giving them much credit or much support in terms of trying to get the company tax cut through, and that they could potentially get some political gain from giving that money to families and have some economic justification for doing that, because they can argue that by giving it to the lowest income families, they are almost by definition also directing it to the slow lane, the non-mining states, which is what the whole point of the sort of taking it from miners and giving it as a company tax cut was supposed to achieve in the first place. And I think the interesting thing after the budget is how that all plays out. The first polls don't look like there's been much of a bounce, but then again, budgets don't bounce. They're kind of like pancakes. They never do.
Yeah.
And as John Sturton wrote over the weekend in the Financial Review, any impact from budgets happens further down the track when people actually see whether they are or they aren't better off. And I think that's really the interesting thing, that the polls over the weekend said that one said 46%, one said 43% of people think that they will be worse off after this budget. Now, that is not going to be the case. The lived experience is not going to be that. So we know for a fact that the carbon tax was already going to be compensated in people's pockets, and the electricity the power price rises that we know are coming were already accounted for in the carbon price compensation. So these payments are all on top of that. So whether people ever, get over their dislike for Julia Gillard, whether they get over their dislike for the minority parliament, in a couple of months' time, they're going to realise that, in fact, they have more money and demonstrably more money, clearly more money, enough more money that they can kind of feel the impact of it.
But I don't know that that'll make them any more grateful. I mean, usually what happens with tax cuts and giveaways is they're pocketed one day and they're forgotten about the next, and people just think, OK, what's next?
It might not be gratitude, but the question is, Tony Abbott's been telling people for 2 years now that they're going to be hugely worse off, that the carbon tax is going to be a disaster, that it's going to go up and up and up, etc., etc. If, in fact, they can see that they have more money, they might start to question that message.
But that won't make them feel more benign towards the government. I think that's the problem. I don't think how much money the government throws at them is going to make very much difference at all to their perception of the government.
Not, but it might
not. But I suppose the one thing you've got to say, which everybody agrees on, is that the voters have made up their minds and they're not listening. So if you're the government, the only thing you can do is, even if they don't listen to the budget, they're not paying any attention. If next month and the month after that and the month after that, they're suddenly getting all these amounts of money in their hand, it's not that they'll necessarily be grateful, but they might be saying, "What? Well, this is interesting. I didn't know about that." Now they might either be really cynical and say, "Why are they throwing me all the bread and circuses money?" or they might actually stop and think, "Oh, well, this is interesting. I might have to pay a bit more attention," which is about all they can really hope to achieve.